Since it's recording now, should I introduce myself?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm Rebecca Ellingston. I am a master's student currently at Syracuse University. I'm graduating in the next couple months. I'm finishing my master's. I am a disabled scientist, so I have an autoimmune disease that makes it difficult for me to walk long distances and can impair my ability to do normal everyday activities. So I have a service dog that can help me. I have seizure-like activity and some seizures. So it's a whole fun conglomerate of I don't really look sick, but I'm kind of sick.
Do you want to talk about being ambulatory? Because I didn't know what that was before I met you.
So most individuals think if you use a wheelchair, you're bound to that wheelchair. You cannot get out of that wheelchair. And for me, that was true for about 2.5, 3 years. I was wheelchair bound. I could stand a little bit, but I couldn't walk. And I most definitely couldn't walk without the aid of like a walker. I could kind of do a couple steps with a walker, and after that, I would collapse. And that was because my immune system was attacking my spinal cord, and it was swelling up the discs around my lumbar spine, and that was making it where I couldn't control my legs. But that doesn't mean with my condition I can't walk. So it has been 2 years since then, maybe 3, and I can now walk about 15 minutes solidly. But that's not on an incline. It has to be like a really like around a track. I can walk 15 minutes, and it's not like a quick walk. It's a pretty slow pace, and by the end I'm pretty exhausted. But I'm slowly working on getting my ability to walk up because I like walking. Walking is fun, and having lost that ability, you take it for granted a little bit, and you forget how much of life is constrained to your physical ability to walk, like doing stairs. Wheelchairs have very small wheels on the front, and if you hit a sidewalk that's uneven, you might not be able to cross that sidewalk. And going across grass is really difficult. So if your friends want to go to a park to hang out, or like I have a service dog, they want to take their dogs to the park, if I have to use my wheelchair, it's really difficult for me to join them. And there's restaurants that are accessible, but not really. A lot of bars are like this. I've had to go around the back of bars and go through the kitchen next to their dumpsters because it's the only area that has an incline because the front has steps. And that's legal. That's allowed because technically they have one entrance that someone in a wheelchair can get through. Or having restaurants with multiple layers. So you don't think about it, oh, it's only one step. I don't have the abdominal strength to be able to pop up on my back wheels and essentially do a wheelie and then go downstairs. I have friends who can, and it's super awesome and it helps so much, but I don't have that ability. But an ambulatory wheelchair user is somebody who has the ability to walk or stand for a short amount of time, but due to a medical condition, it could be a heart condition, right? That walking puts too much strain on the heart because you don't realize how much walking does for your heart, right? So with my condition, my brain doesn't tell my heart how to regulate my blood properly. So when I stand, if I stand even for a short amount of time, most of my blood pools in my legs. And that can be really painful. But luckily, because I've had it for so many years at this point, my nerves have died in my legs. So I don't feel the pain anymore, which is nice, I guess. But it also means that it's easier for me to pass out because my blood pools down there. So using a wheelchair when in a grocery store or when going out and doing things is safer because I'm not going to fall. I'm not just going to randomly pass out. So for some people who use wheelchairs, they can walk. Their legs are totally fine. But it is safer for them to use a wheelchair in public or for longer distances. I have friends who have something like muscular dystrophy, right? Where the muscles eventually just kind of wither away. And so they just don't have the strength to use their legs. Technically, they can walk. Technically, their system should be fine, but they don't have the muscular strength to be able to walk, right? There's other individuals with like brittle bone disease. Muscle-wise, They should be able to walk, no problem. But if they fall because they have brittle bone disease, they could literally shatter their hip. The hip is really hard to put back together when it's in 10 pieces. So their doctors go, instead of having to worry about you bumping into a doorway and breaking a bone, because for someone with brittle bone disease, that's a reality. It's safer for you to stay in a wheelchair, because if your wheelchair bumps into a doorway, it's a titanium frame, typically, it's going to be fine. Your chair is not going to care. Your broken femur will. So an ambulatory wheelchair are most wheelchair users. Most individuals who use a wheelchair can stand at least for a little bit and can walk. They just can't walk far.
Did you say it's about 80%?
Yeah, 80 to 90%. I mean, this is my service cow. She is a 110 pound. Yeah, she's 110 pound St. Bernard. I use her for mobility support and medical alert. So that means that when I start to wobble because I'm lightheaded, she can help me not fall. She can do what's called a forward momentum pull. So she will, essentially, she has a special harness that pulls from her chest, and I grab onto it and I give her a command, and she walks just a little bit in front of me, and it's like a little engine that helps me walk farther so I don't have to use my wheelchair, which is really nice. But for a mobility support dog, they have to be at least 50% of your weight. So if you see a really, really big service dog, typically they're mobility support. Not always, but typically. So she can pull my wheelchair short distances. She can help me get up off the ground. But if she was smaller, because I am 5'8", so I'm tall for a woman, and I'm about 190 pounds, if she was smaller, I could really hurt her using her to get up or to help pull me or to use counterbalance. So if she was a little shorter and she didn't come up to like mid-hip to my hip, she could knock me over when I tried to do counterbalance because I'm leaning on her. So she's lower, she'll take my feet out from under me. So giant service dogs are typically mobility support. But she's also medical alert. So I do have syncope episodes where either my heart rate skyrockets and then tanks, or my blood pressure skyrockets and tanks. And it's because, like I said earlier, my brain doesn't control my circulatory system or really any autonomic function that you don't think about. Digestion, breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, fine motor control, things you don't really think about but you need. It doesn't do that very well. So she can smell when I'm gonna have a seizure. She'll smell my breath, and she can tell me up to 30 minutes in advance, which is nice because then I don't just, pass out and start seizing in a grocery store. She can tell me, and I can either get to a car where it's a little bit more private, or I can sit down in the grocery store so I don't. And then because of my heart rate and my blood pressure, she can hear it. She can literally hear, oh, your heart's doing some weird things, maybe don't do that. And then she can tell me to sit down, to lay down, to relax. And then she can use her body weight in what's called deep pressure therapy to literally push the blood from my legs back into my chest cavity, which can help me recover faster. But that doesn't mean everybody should have a service dog. They're a lot of work, and you get a lot of problems in public, especially when I don't use my wheelchair, because people assume I'm faking, which is annoying.
So next time you see someone get off a wheelchair, don't be judgmental.
Yeah, so most people don't say anything, which is nice. But typically in the disabled community, you get, let's say 80% of people who mind their own business, right? They don't care. And then you get 10% of people who want to help you because they're struggling, and they also use you as what is, I'll say what's affectionately called inspiration porn. So it would be like I'm out with my service dog at the grocery store doing what everybody else does. I'm just grocery shopping, right? Nothing super exciting or crazy about it. And somebody comes up and they talk to me about how I'm such an inspiration because I'm in public. Like, if you think about it for a second, it's saying what, I shouldn't be in public because I'm in a wheelchair? Or when someone says, oh man, you have such a positive attitude despite being in your wheelchair. And it's like, my wheelchair does not confine me like most ambulatory or able-bodied people think. My wheelchair is a tool which gives me more freedom. Without my wheelchair, I'm pretty much stuck in my house. I can walk around my house, but I can't really go very far outside of it or do many things on my own. It's just not safe. And that's okay, but my wheelchair allows me to go do those things. I am a 27-year-old woman with a lot of education and a lot of ambition, and to be held back by my body is unfortunate. And so for somebody to come up when I'm grocery shopping and just wanting to get my Cheerios and telling me I'm an inspiration because I'm buying Cheerios is a bit of a backhanded compliment. Whereas if somebody comes up and says, wow, you're such an inspiration because you stuck to science, despite, there was times and Yoks worked with me where I was having 3 seizures a day. And I would literally crawl under my desk, have a seizure there because it was safer, get up and be like, all right, let me help you finish this experiment when I could. Like, if you call me an inspiration for that, I will give that to you because that's ridiculous. I was insane. I love science, but I should not push myself that far, right? But I enjoyed what I did. And having someone like Yoks there to support me through that was monumental. Without the help of somebody else, there's no way I could have finished my master's. It's just not a reality because of my physical state. So if you tell me I'm an inspiration for the education I've received or the tenacity I've shown to go to conferences or to do the work that I love, I'll give it to you. That's not inspiration porn. But telling me I'm an inspiration because I'm out in public or I'm doing things that everybody else does, like cleaning my house or buying groceries. Like, you won't walk up to the random person in the next aisle and go, wow, such an inspiration, you're in public. Like, you ain't telling that to the new mom. Like, she just had a baby. That's just rude. It's the same, right? But then you get this other spectrum of people who, and honestly, I don't know which I'd prefer to deal with, because it's pretty easy when somebody's being mean to just ignore them or to move on. But when someone's being really nice, you feel a bit bad to be like, you're kind of being rude. I understand where you're coming from is really sweet, and you're trying to be nice and to tell me that it's great that I'm doing these things. But really, you're making light of the struggles I actually face and making fun of the things that I shouldn't be rewarded for. Like, I shouldn't be told, wow, it's so awesome that you can drive. Like, a 16-year-old drives in this country. Like, maybe their friends go, wow, it's so cool you can drive. But another adult isn't going to go, oh, wow, that 16-year-old's driving, kudos. Like, no. Or, oh, that 16-year-old went and bought bread for their mom. Such an inspiration. No, you don't do that. Right? But then you get this other spectrum. And this is the ones that Yoks was saying, like, if you see someone get up out of their car and pull a wheelchair out of the back of their car or their trunk, don't say anything to them. Don't look at them weird. They can probably stand for that short amount of time, right? I have a friend with spina bifida. He can't feel from like mid-thigh down. So he can kind of walk, but it's not really walking. And he has to have the support of something. So instead of putting his wheelchair in the seat next to him, which is what many paralyzed people do, and then dragging it over his body, putting it on the ground, putting his chair together, and then transferring into it, he'll get out of his car, have his chair completely assembled, because you can take the wheels off of a wheelchair to make it easier to move. So he'll have it completely assembled in the back of his car, get out of his car, hold on to his car, shuffle down the car, open the door and pull out his chair and then get into it, because it's easier than dragging a chair across you. It can be done that way. People do it that way. But for many people who can stand for a short amount of time, it's just way easier not to have to take your chair apart every time you get in and out of a vehicle, right? So when you see somebody who stands up out of their car, yeah, maybe they can stand, but maybe they have a heart condition. Maybe they have an autoimmune disease, right? Maybe they are have some kind of genetic disorder where it's dangerous for them to walk long distances, or maybe they're just weak, right? They've got a weaker immune system, they're going through chemotherapy. You don't know looking at them, right? So maybe they just can't, that 10-minute walk through the grocery store, if they had to walk it, that'd be all they were doing, right? Or maybe they'd pass out halfway through, or maybe they'd just be so exhausted they couldn't physically move anymore. So it's better to use a wheelchair. You don't know. But you get this very small amount of people who, and I believe it's because of comedies that make it a joke, right? Where somebody gets out of their wheelchair and everybody goes, oh my God, I've been tricked, right? And it's a common comedic ploy, at least in America, that, oh, he got out of his wheelchair, you've been lying to us. And I think many people get that emotion that when they see someone stand out of a wheelchair or move their legs, they see it as a betrayal, that an individual is faking their disability for some reason to get sympathy or points or maybe park closer. I'm not sure. But what you'll get is you'll get these people who think it's their job to verbally or physically attack individuals. I've parked in handicap before, stood up out of my car and went to get my wheelchair and had people come up and scream at me about how I shouldn't be parking in that space and that I'm young and how dare I. And then when I start to pull out my wheelchair, they're like, oh, now you're playing the sympathy card. You're faking it. I obviously saw you stand. And that's not fair. And what ends up happening is I've had friends who won't go in public with me because we've been attacked in public because I've used my wheelchair and they saw me standing. Or we were at a store and it was inconvenient to call somebody over to grab something too tall up, because when I'm in a wheelchair, I'm only 4 feet tall. Not much you can grab on the upper shelves that side. So you have to stand up, and sometimes I can stand up just fine for a short amount of time and get something and sit back down. It's not a problem. It's not going to exhaust me. And I'll do that, and I'll get nasty looks by people. Or some people will come up and be like, it's really wrong that you're faking that there's some people who can't get out of their wheelchairs and you're sitting here in your wheelchair like you need it. Like, you don't know my medical history. You don't know why I'm using this wheelchair. And because of people acting like that, there's many people who should be using wheelchairs, that it is safer for them to be in a wheelchair, but they refuse to use it because they've been attacked in public so much. I once had a seizure at my university. I got out of my wheelchair to have my seizure. I had my service dog with me, and I've had multiple instances where somebody has tried to take my service dog. For what reason, I don't know. I've had 2 instances where people have just moved my wheelchair while I was laying down having my seizure, or laying down too weak to get up because my blood pressure skyrocketed or whatever. And I had one instance where a kid kicked me in the ribs because I was in his way. Like, I didn't ask to have this condition and I didn't want it, but this is what I have. And I use the tools available to me so that I can still function in society and at 27 years old, not have to be in a nursing home. But you get this small proportion of individuals who think, oh, well, because I saw her move her legs. I saw her use a cane that one time. Oh, I saw her walking with her service dog. She doesn't need her wheelchair. But my condition is so variable, as Yoks can attest. Sometimes in the morning, I'm doing great. I'm walking around. I'm doing experiments. Life is good. And then I hit afternoon, and all of a sudden I'm having seizure after seizure after seizure. And I have to go home early because it's just not safe for me to be around coworkers when I'm just seizing all the time. It's not exactly what you want in a lab setting, which I get, but it's not fair. And a lot of my condition is not being fair, but it's not okay for somebody who has no idea what the other individual is going through to come up and attack them because you believe they're faking it. You have no idea. You have no concept of what this individual has to face or what they're going through, right? And to think like handicap placards aren't as easy to get as people think they are. Like, I wasn't just given one. You have to fill out it's like 10 or 15 pages, and then your doctor fills out an additional 5 pages. It's sent to your state, and then the state can decide that, well, even though your doctor said this, maybe your condition isn't as bad. and then choose not to send you a handicap placard. I like handicap placards because it has to be within 200 feet of the door. That's the requirement, that you can't walk more than 200 to 250 feet reliably, right? So if I want to walk something, having a handicap space closer means I'm more likely to be able to walk through the grocery store because I don't have to park at the way back. But then the other thing I really like is the cross hatches. If I have to use my wheelchair, I have the space to get my wheelchair out. Or if I'm doing really bad, but I still wanted to go in public, and I need a family member or a friend to bring my wheelchair to the side of the car so I can transfer into it, I have that space to do that. Like, I wouldn't mind if the handicap spaces were in the back, since people get really upset that they're at the front, if I had those cross hatches. But if I park at the back because there's no handicap spaces at the front available, I can't guarantee I'll have that space to be able to get my wheelchair back in the car or get myself back in the car from the wheelchair. And there's a lot of, and I hate using this word because it's been in the news so much lately, but there's a lot of misinformation about what disabilities constitute the use of a wheelchair and what invisible illnesses really do and what they mean. Because an invisible illness can be just as crippling as somebody who's been paralyzed, right? And sometimes it can be worse, because someone who's paralyzed wakes up every single day and they know, my legs won't work. I'm transferring into this wheelchair. This is what it's going to be like. And they can adjust easier versus somebody whose condition is so versatile. They're not sure 1 hour to the next what their physical health is going to be at. And that can be really stressful, both physically stressful because your body's freaking out constantly, but emotionally stressful because you can make plans and really, really hope that those plans are going to go through, but then you're that flaky friend who has to cancel all the time because I was fine, but now I can't sit up, or I was fine and now I'm having a seizure. Like, I've been to the mall out with friends on multiple occasions and been like, we're going to have a great time, and then had a seizure on my dinner plate. Although my friends were nice enough to move the dinner plate out, so I seized onto the table, not into my food. But like, that's not something most individuals have to think about or deal with. And that surely isn't something most 27-year-olds have to ask their friends to look out for.
I know
right?
instances where you weren't even invited because people didn't want to have to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that there's a ramp for you to go up.
Because it's stressful, and I understand that it's stressful. And to be honest, it was Yoks who reminded me that that was clearly discrimination, because I was like, well, I understand that it's stressful to be around somebody who could have a seizure at any moment and who could be fine and then just pass out in their wheelchair, or be fine and then just collapse. I live it. I understand it's stressful, and I don't blame people for not wanting to be around it. So I was just like, well, maybe it's not that they don't like me, but it's just really stressful for them, and I get that. And Young's was like, no, the only reason they ain't inviting you is because of your disability, which is discrimination. And I was like, now that you said that, I have to reevaluate some things, because as a white woman, I had never really had to deal with discrimination that much before. I have been very privileged in my young life, and then becoming disabled at 19 and then adjusting to that has really changed my perspective on many things, and how the public interacts with minority groups. And while my experiences would be very different than a person of color, or someone like Yoks who's from a different country and might have unique experiences that come with that, I get a bit of that insight into just how terrible some people can be. And they truly believe they're maybe helping. Like, a lot of people, at least from my experience, who've come up and have gotten upset with me, get upset with me because they're thinking I'm like deceiving others. So they have this righteous mentality that they're right and I'm most definitely wrong, and they have all the right in the world to inform me, sometimes rather abusively, of why I'm wrong. And it's that kind of bravado that is just insane to me. And I'm sure that somebody who's a person of color has experienced that on a much worse scale than I have. but it's a similarity that is not something I would have ever experienced had I not been disabled. Like having to deal with a student, somebody who's years younger than me, thinking that it was acceptable to kick me because I was in the way, despite the fact that I went to the end of a deserted hallway in a building I'm always in to make sure I wasn't in the way to have my seizure. Because frankly speaking, when you have seizures as regularly as I do, it is annoying when people call 911, which is not the attitude I should have. I should be grateful and just, oh, thank you. But like in our country, every time you call an ambulance, I can be charged for that. Even if I don't get on that ambulance, I could be charged $500 because I had my normal 3 o'clock seizure. A student went, oh shit, seizures aren't normal, which they typically aren't, especially in the younger population, called an ambulance. Well, the ambulance can't do anything for me. There's nothing they can do about the type of seizures I have. They're non-epileptic seizures. So my seizures are caused because my brain is getting confused, right? And so it's not the rapid fire electric signals that you get with an epileptic seizure. They're just not understood as well. But I get many similar, I'm going to say phenotypic, but that's not the right word, but many similar symptomatic responses as a seizure. And I have had grand mal seizures before. So your non-epileptic seizures can rarely turn into epileptic seizures. Yay! So I can see, and I've seen videos of me having a seizure. They're terrifying. They're very uncomfortable to look at. Like, I do not like it at all. So I get why someone would see that and go, oh no, we should call someone, right? Like this is a moment we call 911 for. Like, I have been trained for this since a child. I know the numbers, let's call it, right? But at the same time, it can be really frustrating as a chronic or chronically ill individual to have something that I find annoying and inconvenient called emergency services when I know they can't do anything, and all it's going to do is waste their time and my time. And what they're going to end up saying is, oh, this is normal for you? Go see your neurologist. I'm going to be like, that was the plan. Never wanted to be here. And then I get to sit in an ER for 12 hours because they're like, did you know you're having a seizure? And I was like, oh, what? Wow, I'm shocked. Right? But most people don't get those experiences. So I understand it. But at the same time, I feel like the whole world needs to, or maybe not the whole world, maybe it's mostly America, needs to get off their high horse a little bit and understand that not everything is meant to deceive you. And even if there are these rare instances of individuals who are faking a disability, most people aren't. And there's a lot of like requiring a therapist and having to talk about it and really think about it when you become disabled, especially as a female, because a lot of times doctors, for years, I was told by doctors that it was anxiety. My immune system at one time was literally attacking my own skin, and my skin was falling off like a bad zombie movie, like a really bad zombie movie. And I went to a couple doctors who looked at me and were like, well, college is stressful. And I looked at them and I'm like, I have friends with anxiety. Their skin doesn't literally fall off. We can see my hip bone. Like, I've literally touched my own hip bone, which is cool, by the way. Did you know live bones are slimy? I didn't. I know that now. But I've literally touched my own hip bone. I was like, most people who have extreme stress aren't able to see their internal giblies. You know? Like, I'm not a doctor, but I feel like this is just a little bit beyond stress at this point. I'm not going to say stress isn't making it worse, because it probably is, but probably not stress making my skin fall off. Just gonna throw that out there. But because I'm female, and this happens rampantly, especially in the Black community, Black females typically get not rejected, but brushed aside much more than any other race of female in America, despite the fact that all females are pretty much, they're like, well, is it your period? You know, maybe it's just your menstrual cycle. And it's like, no, pretty sure. Like, I know my period, have it since I was a child. And I know how that works. This is different. And then doctors will be like, but is it? And that kind of bias is just, it's so rampant, right?
I actually read an article the other day that said if Black women give birth in the presence of a Black doctor, they tend to live much longer and healthier.
It's insane. I read a very similar study that they'll have like preeclampsia, which occurs after birth, which could kill you. And they'll be like, hey, I'm having these symptoms. And a lot of times they'll be brushed off and they're like, oh, it's normal after pregnancy. Don't worry about it. And then they end up dying or being in a way worse position because preeclampsia is really easy to treat. You get high levels of magnesium. Not great, can't breastfeed on it, but like it makes you feel sick, but you get the magnesium and then you won't die. Like it's a really easy treatment if it's caught. But if you're not believed, especially if it's your first pregnancy, a lot of times they'll be like, oh, well, honey, you just don't know. And it's just not. I think as a scientist, we go through so much training on ethics and implicit bias to make sure that our results and our science isn't biased in a way that we don't think about, right? Like we're expecting this result and we try not to, and we try to make our write-ups in such a way that we're not being biased. But there's always things that you don't think about, which is part of why peer review is there. So you're not being implicitly biased without realizing it, which is what implicit bias is, but argument for another day. And I think that there needs to be more of that across the board, that it can't just be the sciences pushing to be cognizant of biases that you may have that you don't realize you have. And if we can push that into the community at large, I think there will be a lot less discrimination problems. Like one of the things I was told going into the workforce by my university was expect it could take up to 3 years for you to find a job because I'm disabled. And companies won't phrase it in such a way that it's clear discrimination, right? What they'll say is something like, oh, well, you're not qualified enough for this position, or we don't think you're a good fit for the community we've established. And those can be true. But a lot of times it's a thinly veiled way to get around discrimination. That, I mean, Yoks and I were talking earlier, and she had mentioned that many individuals are qualified or overqualified, but because they require a visa, companies won't hire them because they cannot afford it. They cannot afford the cost of sponsoring someone with a visa, and that's insane. Like, we're cutting off job opportunities for individuals and putting it in such a way that it sounds nice, but really it's a lie, to get around laws for discrimination, because if they were found to be discriminating, they'd get in trouble. But another thing a lot of people don't realize is I can still be fired for my disability and it not be discrimination. So according to the American with Disabilities Act, when it comes to working, especially for individuals who have seizures, if your seizures are impeding the way of your work to a point that your company feels you cannot maintain status quo, you can be fired for your seizures and then not get in trouble for it. It would be discrimination if they simply did not hire you because you had seizures. But if they decide to fire you because they feel you're not productive enough at work because your seizures are impeding your ability to work, they can fire you. Despite the fact that I've talked with like other people and they're like, look, many white collar workers are on Facebook 3 hours a day. And if you spend an hour of your day dealing with a seizure, that's still probably less than someone who's on Facebook for 3. But because my getting out of work would be so obvious, it is possible for them to legally fire me, which is a big concern for me because I want to work. I want to save money. I want to have kids and a family and maybe own a house one day. And to be told that due to something outside of my control, I could lose that is devastating, right? Like part of the reason I couldn't complete my PhD was they found a brain aneurysm while I was doing my qualifying exams. And I had decided, my doctors were like, look, like, this isn't good, but it's not operable. Like, it's not super big, but you might want to make some funeral plans and reduce your stress. So I was put on a bunch of heart medications to help not have it explode. And I had to make the decision, do I drop out of school? Do I drop from a PhD to a master's? Or do I try to keep my PhD? And I made the decision that between what my committee wanted me to do in addition to the work I'd already done would be physically difficult for me. And with the medical diagnoses I had had, it would not benefit me to stay for a PhD. And although I had always wanted one, I did not want to die for a PhD. I didn't think any degree was worth my death. I just didn't. And so I dropped down to a master's and decided to stay in. And then through a lot of physical therapy and a lot of medications and a lot of reduction of stress, my brain aneurysm is now classified as a weakened vessel. So it isn't large enough to be considered an aneurysm anymore, which I didn't know was a thing, but I know that's a thing. So I don't have to worry about it as much, but it's technically still there. So I need to be careful with the kind of things I do. Then my habits are more healthy than I have ever had as a child, but I am technically more unhealthy than I've ever been, which is a weird line to sit on. But part of that and the expectations on PhD students is why less than 2% of scientists are disabled. Less than 0.5% of those disabled scientists are female. It is so difficult to stay in and get a PhD, so physically demanding, even for able-bodied individuals. They'll deprive themselves of sleep. They'll work 80, 90 hours a week. They'll have no social lives. They'll destroy their mental health to get a degree. And because this is considered the norm, somebody who's already at a physical disadvantage, you can't keep up. It's just not. It's not healthy and it's not possible. And not only not healthy and not possible for the individual who's disabled, it's not healthy and not possible for the individuals who are able-bodied. Like, I don't think any scientist should be expected to work 90 hours a week and should be expected to be coming in at 2 o'clock in the evening because, well, my samples are out at 2 a.m., right? You shouldn't have a scientist in the lab at 2 a.m. just because.
That's what is expected of them.
Mm-hmm. And many labs, if you don't, so legally, they cannot tell you to work more than 40 hours a week, legally. But what you'll find is socially, you'll get this pressure that individuals, if they work less than, so I was working between 50 and 60 hours a week for my PhD. And I was still getting, how do I put this nicely? Social pressure from other individuals saying things like, well, you must not care enough about your science or your degree to not be in here 80 hours a week. I'm here every single day. Why aren't you here on the weekends? And it was because physically I needed the weekend to sleep, to recover my strength so I could work the week. And I think everybody needs that. I don't think that it was almost half jealousy because I was getting that time off, and half they felt I didn't deserve it because, well, I'm working that hard, why aren't you? And I think that social atmosphere is really toxic, and it just breeds a terrible mental health environment. And luckily my advisor is really big on mental health and taking your days off, and she thinks that if you work 40 to 50 hours a week and legitimately work and you prioritize your time and you're good at time management and you learn those skills, you can easily graduate with your PhD in 5 years. She doesn't think you should have to work 90 hours a week to get a PhD in 5 years. She thinks that's just not okay, and that you need to have interpersonal relationships, and you should foster romantic relationships, and like work on your ability to time manage and multitask. And that by dedicating so much time to science, you become a workaholic, and you'll have more problems later adjusting to the workforce, especially if you go into academia, because you're going to keep those habits.
And you're going to make your other incoming students have the same habits.
Yep. And it's only going to perpetuate this entire social system where scientists are driving themselves ragged. I mean, divorce rates in scientists are exceptionally high. They're either single or divorced or married to other scientists because other scientists get it. And they're also working insane hours. So it's just this, yeah, you're getting all this great science done, but you're almost, if you want a family, which it's getting much better now, it is. But if you want a family, or if you're disabled and you want to have the ability to take care of yourself physically, you're almost pushed out of the field, which is why many individuals, even if they're disabled and they get a PhD, they don't stick with it, right? It's not like I'll get a lot of people who are like, well, Stephen Hawking did it.
He's a theoretical physicist. He didn't have to do any manual work.
And that's where I get back at them. I'm like, my science is genetics. There's a lot of lab and bench work and repetitive motion. And because of my condition and my neuropathy, repetitive motion is difficult for me, which is part of the reason I work with Yoks. Because when you have to pipette 96 well plates and you need to do 3 of them, and you have to repeat that motion, and each 96 well plate has 4 different reagents in it. So you're doing that one plate 400 times. And I can only do it, what would you say? I'd get 10 rows in, maybe, and my arm would fail. Like I didn't have the grip strength to hold a pipette. Like I can't maintain a job in the sciences like Stephen Hawking could, because my science is physical. You have to physically do it. And what's going to end up happening is if I tried to stay in that, a university is nice. They'll give me a lab assistant. They'll support me. Industry won't. Why would they pay for me when they can pay for my lab assistant? And while I get it financially, it's unfortunate, because it really is pushing out individuals who could otherwise do very well. It just really breeds an environment that creates workaholics and individuals who just aren't that great in their personal lives, but are phenomenal in their careers. And how there's some scientists, and there's this slight shift you see in the social environment of individuals pushing more towards having life work balance, and not having their PhD students work 90 hours a week, and really pushing towards learning better time management skills. But it's not like a lot of people say they support it, but then in their own laboratories they don't. Right? So publicly they'll say, oh, it's a great idea, we should do that. And then when it comes to implementing said idea, they don't. And it creates this even more frustrating cycle.
Academia has become especially toxic.
Yeah, it has. That's why a lot of people are leaving academia.
And we also keep hearing about all these false papers, false results, because they just pressured into it.
Yeah,
to them by the university to keep their grants.
Yeah, just to keep their job, they'll fake data because they need the publications in the nicer areas, right? And the problem with that is, if in science, your name is everything. So if you're found to have been in a lab, like as a PhD student, where they falsified data, your career is done. It's because it's thought that you've learned these practices. How are you to unlearn them? Right? And it really rocks the science world in a very bad way, because a lot of future projects are based off what people have already done. And if you're basing your results and your entire experiments and your funding off somebody else's work, and they lied about it, it's going to cause problems as you get into that work, because you're going to notice discrepancies. And there's normally discrepancies, right? Like anytime you run an experiment, there's going to be slight changes because of ambient air temperatures and techniques and everything else, right? So you get this issue because is the work this other lab is doing on the other side of the world now void because you've lied about the last 10 papers you've done? But you lied about those 10 papers to keep your job because you couldn't advance in your career unless you got those papers. And then you'll get these individuals who have 400 or 500 papers that are published, and they're perceived to be better than somebody who only has 10 publications and they're only publishing one paper a year. But already publishing one paper a year is huge. That's so much work. So, and I think that's another problem the public doesn't see. They don't see the amount of work that goes into a publication and how many experiments might have been done but then never put in that publication. But for a lab to crank out tons and tons of papers is just an astronomical amount of work. And they have to have an exceptionally large lab and an exceptionally large budget. But then when you get those larger grants, it's easier for you to get more larger grants. So it's again this cycle of people tempted to fake it so that they can move forward in their careers. And it's almost this like prevalent fear for years and years and years of, am I good enough and am I going to get fired? Because unfortunately, and there's a bit of a split starting, at least in the sciences, professors, their main job is not teaching, it's research. So there's this new approach where universities hire teachers or professors who only teach. They do not do any research. And what happens is those professors teach your undergraduates and your research professors teach your graduate students. And I think this split is really good because there's a lot of research professors who are phenomenal researchers and they output amazing stuff, but you get them in front of a class of undergraduates and they cannot teach them because they forgot what level they're at. And so they think that their level's here when really it's down here. And so they lose all their students. And all that happens is you get these frustrated undergrads who feel stupid and not heard and lost. And they're frustrated because they're paying all this money for this education and they don't feel like they're getting anything. And then they blame the professor, which, yeah, it's partly the professor's fault, but it's also the student's responsibility to learn. So it's this weird
part if it's a class of 100 or 200 students. If
it's a small, some larger universities will have 600 kids in a class. They'll do a huge auditorium and there's 600 kids, and those students never actually interact with the professor. They interact with TAs, which are graduate students. And so they know their TAs and they work really well with their TAs because they're split into small groups of like 20 students, which is a class size. And so they have the main professor teach all these students, and then they'll split apart, and at least once a week they have to meet with their TA and talk about what they talked about in class. And it's really the TA who then teaches them. And this, I'm not saying is a bad system. It can be really great for teaching assistants who want to go into academia to learn how to teach their students. But it's not the best learning environment. So there's some universities like
Syracuse. A lot of work if you have to sit and listen to a teacher teach a 1 hour or 2 hours class, and then you go to your TA and then learn the whole thing all over again.
And technically, a lot of times you don't have to meet with that TA. So there's students who won't, and then they fail, and they don't know why they fail, and it's because that they weren't taught adequately. And I'm not saying it's the fault of the professors, because at least at the collegiate level, you should be able, the professor should be able to give you information, and then you take that information, absorb it, reabsorb it, take your time with it, and figure it out yourself. The professor's job as a teaching professor is to guide you through material. It is your job as the student to learn it. And that's where a lot of students get frustrated, because in high school, that isn't the system at all. It is the teacher's job to get you to understand that material so you can pass your test. College professors could care. Like, they don't. A 0 is, and I have said this to my students when they're like, it's your job to teach me. I'm like, no, it's my job to guide you. It is your job to learn. It is really easy, and I will say this to students in the future if I ever have them, but it is really easy for me to put a 0 in the grade book. It doesn't impact me. You're paying for this education. You're spending the time. This is not mandatory. And honestly, college isn't the best route for everybody. You can make a lot of money doing other things. Construction makes a lot of money. Equipment operators make tons of money. Mechanics make good money, right? Welders make stupid amounts of money, right? Scientific glass blowers, it's a dying field. I love scientific glass blowing. I find it super fun, right? Their starting salary is $80,000 a year. That's awesome. You don't need a college degree to do that. You need an apprenticeship, right? And these are trades that are going out. And the thing is, you can't replace welders with machines. That's why welders get paid so well. You cannot replace scientific glass blowers with machines. There's many joints and scientific apparatus that cannot be made by a machine. They have to be made by hand. A machine cannot replicate it. It's not possible. So like, these are jobs that you could do and not go to college. So sitting in my class and being frustrated and yelling and getting mad at me because you don't want to be here. You don't have to. This isn't high school. High school, you're required to get a high school diploma or a GED. You're required to be there. It is a legal requirement until you are 16 years of age. And then I think 16, you can sign yourself out of high school. But you might need parental consent. 18, you don't. You can just be like, nope, I'm done. But you don't have to be here. You're paying a lot of money to be here. And most of the time, you're going into a lot of debt to be here. So I like the split in academia where they're starting to look at these professors went to college, they got their PhDs, they're teachers. They're good at teaching. They understand the science of teaching. They want to teach the students and they teach them well. And then you have the research professors who are going to deal with your graduate students, which is a completely different level of education, right? Like, it's less turning in assignments and showing you can figure out the material and more figure this out on your own. I'm going to give you this paper, tell me what you see, which is a completely different way of thinking. Mm-hmm. So having a research professor deal with graduate students who already have that base level of education would be way better for everybody involved. You're going to have less frustration on the researcher side, right? Because, well, I've got 10 grants to write and I still have 10 graduate students I have to manage, and I've got some undergrads in the lab and I need to do X, 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 and X, and I really don't care about this class, right? Versus somebody who, I don't have to worry about all that research. I only have to teach this course, and they're going to teach it really well because that's all they got. And the stress load there changes. And then everyone, I think it would breed that better environment, right? Because you wouldn't have professors saying, well, I need to be here 90 hours a week. And thus my students need to be here 90 hours a week because I'm spending 30 hours a week on classes. So I only have 50 hours a week to work on granting, grant writing, the research, which is my main job, which if you didn't have that teaching portion, you'd only have your main job, then you could work 45 hours a week and it'd still be reasonable. But because academia has this such high standard for work hours and just the stress of it, right? You get so many people who are pushed out of the field who could do amazing things because they can't physically keep up or they don't want to emotionally keep up. They don't want to sacrifice their life for a career. And I think that's part of the reason why you get these die-hard academic professors who are like, no, we have to be here this many hours, because they did sacrifice that. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, I sacrificed that. You should too. And if you don't, You don't care enough.
But I just think that this is what it took me to get here. So this is what it's going to take you to get there.
Mm-hmm. And it's just not true.
It's not.
And it's unfortunate because you're pushing out so many, especially women who want to have families. And like I said, they're doing so much better about this. Like there's conferences that will have nursing stations, and they'll like help you like have extra areas so you can bring your kids, and maybe have like a daycare center so you can go to the conference but your kids can still be there. Because as Yoks is aware, and I'm not sure if people who are listening to this are aware, some conferences are an entire week. They can be 7 to 10 days of packed speaker after speaker after speaker, lunch, speaker, poster conference, right? Like these typically occur 5 to 10 days, and they'll pretty much only occur once a year, right? But that's one conference that occurs once a year. And if your field can be at multiple conferences, you might have an entire month or 2 months of conferences to go to. And because these conferences are typically supported by academics, they're in the summer, because that is the easiest time for them to get off because they don't have classes to teach. So you're taking away 4 to 6 weeks, right? Depending how many conferences this person goes to, from their kids, from their spouse, from their own research. And these conferences are really important to keep up on research, to have those networking connections. So they're exceptionally important and should be attended. But they're also really long and really exhausting, right? You're going to be there, and I've been to conferences. That's a 12, 14-hour day for 7 days straight. And they can be in different countries than you're used to being in. It's not always close to you. And that can be really stressful. And so for somebody who has a family, can you find a babysitter for a month? Right? Can you find somebody who's going to be able to take care of your kids for 10 days? That might change your opinion on whether or not you stay in the field. And it's unfortunate.
You work a lot with, you do a lot of workshops with kids.
Yeah, I do a lot of outreach. I have a lot of fun with
How do
outreach.
they react when they see you in a wheelchair? Or does it even register in their head?
Yeah, so you get a couple of different reactions. I think the coolest reactions are when I see kids who are in wheelchairs. And it's only happened a couple times. But I met this one kid who, he was an ambulatory wheelchair user. He used, what do you call them, arm crutches.
Mm-hmm.
And when I rolled up, he was just like, he didn't even talk about his poster. I was doing a science fair, and he wouldn't even talk about it. He was just so thrown off and kept asking me, "Are you sure you're a real scientist?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, of course, that's why I'm here." And he's like, "So I could be a scientist?" I'm like, "If you wanted to be, sure. I don't see why not." Like, he was just like completely thrown off guard that I was in a wheelchair, because, well, I also use a wheelchair, and that means I can do things too. And I think that representation is really important. But most of my interactions are not with students or children who are disabled. So it depends on the age group. I have volunteered at some museums with science and technology. So there's a Museum of Science and Technology in Syracuse, New York that I volunteered at. And then I volunteered at like an aquarium down here and a couple of zoos where they'll have biologists come and talk to the biologists. And I get a couple of reactions. If they're really little, they don't know what a wheelchair is. So they're just staring at it. Like, I'm talking like, so the Museum of Science and Technology in Syracuse does like 3 to 10. So most of the age group is really little. So they've never seen a wheelchair. Sometimes they'll stare at it. Sometimes they squint. They might ask questions that like adults would never ask, because they're like, "Oh, you don't ask those things? Like, why are you in a chair?" Right? Or if I have my service dog with them, "Why do you have a dog? Can I bring my dog anywhere? What does your dog do?" Or there was this woman, the mother was absolutely mortified, and I thought it was the cutest thing ever. I was sitting behind a table and I was talking about plants and about how trees can take water up through their system. And there was a bunch of like 7-year-olds in front of me. And this woman all of a sudden runs behind the table, and I look back, and there is a like 3-year-old maybe sitting on my service dog's butt chewing on her tail. Like, she was laying pretty much like she is now. And this child was just sitting on her butt and had her tail up and was just chewing on it. And she could care less. She was just sitting next to my wheelchair, doing her job, just hanging out. And I turned around and I was like, what do I do? Like, this isn't my child. Can I just pick this child up off my service dog? He's not really hurting anything. He's still in diapers. And she just runs over. She goes, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And just picks this kid up and sprints away. Just runs away. But like, that kid didn't know. It was just a big fluffy dog, right? So I get a lot of questions about like, well, what is a service dog if she's with me? Because I don't always take her. Why are you in a wheelchair? Well, if you can move your legs, why do you need a wheelchair? And I try to be really understanding with kids because they're going to ask more questions because they don't have a filter. And I think that's okay. I think that those interactions are precious because might be the first person they've ever seen in a wheelchair. And I'm probably one of the first people they've ever seen so young in a wheelchair, right? And with my service dog, I try to be especially cognizant of kids. And you'll get this like really cool age gap. So adults will typically try to like stealthily pet her in public. I call it a drive-by. They'll walk by and they'll just kind of like reach their arm out and graze across her body as they walk by. You should not do that. It is distracting to the service dog. It can be really detrimental depending on the type of service dog. So for a mobility support alone service dog, that's not super detrimental. It's rude, but it's not detrimental. For a medical alert dog, you could distract that dog. And I had a friend who had really bad seizures, has really bad seizures. And someone distracted her service dog while she was at her dad's work. And he didn't tell her she was going to have a seizure. And she fell and their work floor was concrete. She needed 32 screws in her jaw and upper face because of the way she fell and started seizing on the concrete. Had her service dog not been distracted, he could have warned her. So in those instances, it can be really dangerous, but it can also be more benign, right? Like a service dog is still a dog. So if you come over and you're making cute noises and kissy noises and like touching the dog's going to get excited. And when they're working, they have to do this thing that's called sensation stacking, which means a police dog, a working dog, a service dog, they're not allowed to react to things that a normal dog would react to, right? They have to hold it in. And that's what sensation stacking is, right? Like a police dog can't react to every smell they smell, right? They can't just go around sniffing the grass because they want to. No, we're working, right? They can't just react because somebody's being nice or wants to pet them. They have to work. So what can happen is you excite the dog and the dog can't get back into work mode. And then I have to leave public because my dog can no longer function as a service dog. And that's not fair to me, and that's obnoxious, right? Like it's teaching the service dog that they can act like that to get out of work. So a lot of people will say, absolutely not, you can't pet my service dog. But because I do so much outreach with kids, and my service dog is so big, so there's some kids who have never seen a dog that big, right? So I've got to think about it from a couple perspectives. Has this child ever seen a dog that's 110 pounds? Has this child ever seen a service dog, right? Has this child ever seen somebody who's disabled? So you have to explain it, and you have to be more careful with kids, right? Like an adult might look at me, might try to pet my dog, but they might not say anything. But what you'll get is you'll get these kids who are like 10 and above, and it's super cute. You'll see a group of them, and I've been to museums and they've done this, where they'll all go, oh my God, a dog, right? And it'll be a group, and you'll get them and they'll start to run, and then the older kids who can read will stop them and go, no, it says do not distract. And then the younger kids will get all disappointed, right? It's like certain age kids, I don't even like get upset with them when they touch her or they come and they ask questions ever, because they can't read, right? They just see a giant red vest and there's a giant fluffy dog and her tail is so fluffy and I just want to touch it. right? Like I was in the mall one time and this woman had like 3 kids, maybe 4. One was still in the stroller, one was like 10, and the other one was like 3 or 4. And I was walking and I walked past them and I kept walking and I didn't pay attention. And all of a sudden she gasped and I looked back and her child is literally running behind my service dog, just holding her tail. Like I was in my wheelchair, wasn't even paying attention. I'm just rolling along and I look back and there's a 3-year-old just like, oh, a tail, and just holding on for dear life. But I think it's important to go out and be in public because I forget, since I live, people have never seen a service dog. So when doing outreach, I think it's very important for especially younger people to see somebody who's an ambulatory wheelchair user, because as we had mentioned earlier, like most people don't think about it. Like, oh, she can move her legs. Why is that, right? And then you also like to expose them to a service dog and the proper etiquette about being around a service dog, right? And there's a lot of service dog handlers who get very annoyed when they're in public because they just want to go grocery shopping or get this thing done and go home. And you don't know that you could have been the 13th person who stopped them in the last 10 minutes to talk about their dog. And they're like, yes, it's a dog. I want to get my groceries and go home. Right. And so I have been rude to people in public and they'll be like, oh my God, that's such a cute dog. And I'll almost cut them off and be like, yeah, and move on. Because I don't want to sit here and have a 10-minute conversation with you. Because when I go in the next aisle to look for my spaghetti sauce, there's going to be another person who wants to have a 10-minute conversation. And I already have very little energy. So I need to get in, get what I need, and leave. And I don't want to have to stop and have a conversation with every single person who sees my dog and thinks it's cute. But if I can help the next generation realize, oh, what is a service dog? Why is it important? Why don't we touch service dogs? Right? And then I can explain, some service dogs have release words. So my service dog has 3 different commands for working. Let's go to work is we're putting on your vest, we're going to work, we're doing things. You have to behave as a service dog, right? There's go say hi, and that is because I do so much outreach. I wanted kids to know they could ask, and some handlers will say, yeah, you can pet my service dog, but you have to wait until they say something. So her keyword is go say hi, and that is you're still in vest, you still have to act like a service dog, but you can walk over, get some pets, and come back. And then when she comes back, we'll say, let's go to work. And then she starts working again. And her last command is free dog, and that is everything goes. You are a dog, you are off work, you can run around, you can be an idiot, you can grab your toys and throw them in the air, you can do whatever you need to do to what's called sensation destack. So if we've had a really long day and we come home and I give her free dog, sometimes she's super squirrely for like 20 minutes because I haven't been able to do all the things that my instincts as a dog tells me what to do all day. So on free dog, she can run around and be an idiot. But with go say hi, she still has to act presentable because we're in public and we're going back to work. It is a quick, you can be pet, come back to work, let's go. And I felt that was important because I do like outreach and I do like educating kids and adults. I don't always have the energy for adults, but also adults on why service dog etiquette is so important, right? Like, it's not always going to be the case that if you distract that service dog, somebody's going to have such a bad seizure they require screws in their face, right? But you should act like it is, right? Like, I understand that dog is super cute and you want to say hi, but that dog has a job, right? Like, you're not going to walk up to a police dog and say, can I pet your dog?
Mm-hmm.
And most of the time, the police officer is going to say no because the dog is working, right? Like, you're not going to walk up to somebody like airport dogs, right? Like, you're not going to walk up to one of those and say, hey, can I pet your dog? Right? So why would you walk up to my service dog and ask the same thing? And I most definitely don't mind. I've been stopped a couple times while out with her when she's in vest of people asking, like with their kids, being like, could you explain what a service dog is and what they do? And I have no problems with that because you're being polite about it. But if you point from a distance and I'm in my wheelchair and I'm wearing glasses and I'm clearly reading something and you tell your child it is a seeing eye dog, no. Like there's many different types of service dog. That's why they're called service dogs, not seeing eye dogs. There's medical alert. There's diabetic alert specifically. There's seizure alert. Their medical alert's more of a overarching for all of that. But there's also medical response, which is easier to train than medical alert. So diabetic alert and response are really easy to train because when you start to have too much sugar in your blood, your breath smells different. So you just collect the saliva when it smells sweeter, and you can train the dog to react to that smell. Seizures are so finicky. You cannot train a dog to be seizure alert. They either pick it up and they start alerting and acting different before you get a seizure, and you shape the behavior, or they never do, and you train them what a seizure looks like and how to react to what they visually see. And it is honestly easier to train the reaction because you can have somebody who's healthy fake what a seizure looks like and then train the dog how to react. But with alerts, like Ash alerts, I cannot fake a seizure to teach her what to do because she knows I'm faking it and gets upset because I faked it. Whereas if the dog can't alert, they don't know you're faking it. So they just respond as appropriate. Right? So doing outreach, I think, is important because it shows them that it normalizes it. It normalizes it and gives them a standard. And then it explains to them versus like somebody who's having a bad day, maybe this is the first service dog they've ever seen, they ask questions and the person's in a bad mood, right? And so the interaction taints all service dogs in their mind, right? Like service dog handlers are grouchy, right? Service dogs are, I don't even want to say mean, but like unapproachable, which they should be. Service, you shouldn't just approach a service dog, but I want it to be more of a positive experience and a learning experience. And so I do a lot of outreach because I've always liked kids and I've always liked interacting with kids. And I also think it's really, really good for the public to see me in a setting where like I'm the educator and it's not this weird thing or this oddity, this rare creature, right? It's just no, like they exist, it's normal and it's okay. And that way in the future, if they see someone young in a wheelchair and they move their legs, it's not the people who are like, you're faking it. What are you doing? Why are you using a wheelchair when you can obviously move your legs? They understand, oh, well, some people can use their legs, but they can't really use them for long, or it's dangerous to use them. And kids accept that logic so much faster and easier than adults do, because adults already have all these preconceived notions and they've seen all the comedies where somebody stood up out of a wheelchair and everybody reacted, right? Or they were faking requiring a wheelchair. So because a kid doesn't have that, they just know, oh, well, I talked to the one lady in the wheelchair and she had a service dog and she said, well, yeah, I can walk, but it's not really safe for me to walk. And we don't want me to just fall all the time, right? That hurts. And a kid would go, well, yeah, we don't want to fall. Falling is bad. That hurts. And they get it, right? Or like I'll explain my syncope episodes as surprise naps to a kid. Be like, you know how nap time's really good? And most kids are like, yeah, nap time can be nice, but I don't really like nap time. I'm like, well, imagine if you just took surprise naps. Like you were walking and all of a sudden you just nap time. You just fell to the ground and had a nap. And they'd be like, oh, that's terrible. I wouldn't like that. I'm like, well, that's what I do. And I can't control it. My brain just kind of goes, it's nap time now. And I have to take a nap. I don't get to argue. So I'll fall wherever I am and take a nap. And so my service dog can tell me, hey, your body's about to tell you to take a nap. And that way I can lay down or I can use my wheelchair so I don't get hurt, because we don't want to get hurt, right? And that's how you explain it to the kid. And the kid goes, oh, that makes sense. I can see why you can walk, but you use a wheelchair now, right? Whereas an adult, they would think I'm condescending if I said it like that. But if I say, well, I have syncope, they might not know what syncope is. Like, I didn't know what syncope was until I was diagnosed with it. I was like, all right, cool, great words. what does this have to do with me? Right? And on the other hand, I shouldn't have to tell another person my medical history. I shouldn't have to justify my existence and my requiring of medical tools to another adult I don't know. And when I put it like that, a lot of people are like, well, I never thought about it like that. I'm like, yeah, your public information, your medical history is not part of your public sphere. Only people you want to know about it. And you wouldn't expect a random stranger at the grocery store to walk up while you're checking your eggs and go, hey, your last doctor's visit, did they check you for, diseases? Like, no. Do you have any disorders? Do you have a condition I should be aware of? Like, dude, I don't even know you. I'm just getting my eggs. Why do I have to tell you my medical history? And that's where most individuals I have talked to in the disabled community come from. They're like, I shouldn't have to justify why I'm disabled to somebody who doesn't even know me. And so if you ever do get in a situation with somebody who's disabled and they're more ornery about it, it's probably because of that. They don't feel they have to, and they should have to tell you why they use that medical equipment.